Hey guys, Magnet back here. Gonna be talking a little bit more about StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void, and this video is mainly gonna be about the stuff that I want to see them doing in Legacy of the Void. Leg of the Void, I don't know what that is, but Legacy of the Void is definitely the next theme they're coming out with, and I'm gonna talk a lot about it. So just sit back, prepare yourselves. I'll try to make this interesting for you rather than just me saying whatever, but what we're going to be talking about, or at least I will be, is my complaints with Heart of the Swarm is going to be a big part of this. I'm also going to talk about the new stuff they've talked about in Legacy of the Void so far, and I know that they haven't announced anything for sure, and that's an understatement because a lot of things will change. But still, I think that we need to talk about their ideas and where they're going with it, and the things I just disagree with. Excuse me, I've been sick for a little while, but and I'm going to talk about what they need to do to just make a more fun game. And largely, I'm going to base a lot of these complaints off the fact that I feel like they're just relying on their design ideas going far because it's StarCraft. StarCraft still needs to explore and figure out what makes a fun game and put things in that people really like. And I'm going to also touch on exploring areas we've never really seen before in StarCraft, how they can kind of think outside the box to make the next game really good. So what we're going to be talking about first is the new Protos unit, which they have not talked about at all. And this is what I think has to be done with it. This unit has to be low tech, and I'm also expecting it to be a gateway unit, to be totally honest. The reason being is because, actually there's a few reasons. The first reason is that almost every single new unit that we've gotten over time for Protoss has been very, very high tech and almost impossible to get to. So, if you think about gateway units, they really haven't changed since Wings of Liberty. They've barely changed at all. And really the only things that have changed majorly are just like research times on various units that come out of there. So, I think the direction they are going is going to be for a new gateway unit. And this unit needs to fill an unfulfilled role, like we can see right there. And the one unfulfilled role that Protoss does not have in almost every single game is map control. Map control is always taken by Taran or Zerg. And even in PvP, it's kind of rare to be out on the map with any units because you'll just lose them, considering they have such low escapability, and they don't really do anything while they're on the map anyway, so there's no real point to have them out there. So what I'm thinking that they're going to do with this is they're going to make it some sort of non-massable ability on there. Say, for example, you could do something like teleport a unit that you select from where it is back to your base or something like that. And it could be a friendly unit or it could be an enemy unit, so you could just teleport one in and kill it. And that would be cool. It wouldn't be anything like you just need to go up and kill it, but it'd also make it interesting, and it would make it so that this isn't a unit you could just make 50 of them and just kill people. So you could teleport out units, you could teleport out things like queens or overlords or anything in the early game to where later in the game they're going to just not really pull their weight or be worth it. So that's what I think we need to look out for. And of course, rewarding multitasking is something that's kind of going to be a focus of Legacy of the Void anyway. So this is where, honestly, I would go as a game designer. I would look more towards something that they haven't really done before. And just relocating enemy units on the map is something that they really haven't thought of yet. So I don't know. I think that'd be kind of cool. And I think this is somewhere similar along the lines of where they're going. So let's talk about the next thing. The next thing is that Swarm hosts should not control a game. One thing I can definitely say, no matter what perspective you're playing from, is that fighting into constant locust rallies sucks. And the funny thing about Legacy, or rather Heart of the Swarm, is that they were talking back in Heart of the Swarm beta about making the game more exciting, making it more fast-paced, and they introduced the slowest unit ever in the Swarm host. There's just so many things that are not fun with this, and the direction they really need to go, which they've already talked about a little bit in Legacy of the Void, is they need to make this unit a lot more about feast or famine, in the sense that if you can get a couple of effective spots with your Swarm hosts and make them do something, then it'll be cool. Because right now, it's kind of like, if you make Swarm hosts, you have to wait for about 10 minutes for them to start paying for themselves and actually kill an equal value worth of things that you've made. And for the most part, as far as watching StarCraft, turtling is really boring, and Swarm hosts are the ultimate turtle unit. There's just so much wrong with this, and this is actually going to be really hard for them to take care of, but the goal here needs to be eliminating turtling while still keeping them in a good place in the game. And the way you do that is really big risk and reward with it, in the sense that they could either do a lot, or if you get them caught, they could do nothing. And there's just a little bit too many safe strategies, and I think too few risk and reward based strategies in StarCraft that make the game fun to watch. So this is something they should definitely explore. Next thing we're going to talk about is Tempest. And you'll notice that basically the things that I've complained about so far are things that they did wrong in Heart of the Swarm. And this was yet another unit that they really just got wrong in Heart of the Swarm. The whole spirit behind the Tempest from the start was just hard countering whatever units that they thought were a problem. And that's a very poor way to design a game. The reason being is because it solved a few game-breaking scenarios like Mass Colossus, Broodlords, whatever, but the Tempest being in the game didn't introduce any new gameplay scenarios. So it's like, what kind of expansion just eliminates gameplay scenarios and doesn't add new ones? That's exactly what the Tempest did, and that's such a big problem. So I think if they're searching for something new to do with this unit, it needs to find a way to introduce new situations that we haven't really seen before in the game, and that's going to be hard. I'm not saying that's going to be super easy, but if you think about the things that Protoss can and can't do right now, they're still a very turtley race. They kind of just sit there and they wait for a long time, and the Tempest encouraged that even more. So it sounds funny, but you almost need to totally flip the script with this and make this a fast unit that kind of pokes away at people in semi-irritating ways, in the sense that it'll force them to do something, kind of like Swarmhost did, except for not nearly as annoying. You just need to encourage action with this, and this didn't encourage action. It just encouraged more gameplay that was not Wings of Liberty, and that's lame, for lack of a better word. So Tempest, they're undergoing a huge change, and I really don't know where they're going with it. But this is a unit that's a huge problem, and honestly, if I were designing a brand new game and I got dumped this idea, my first inclination would be to just cut it totally. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but it almost has that kind of stench behind it where it's just so bad and it'd be so hard to make it work that it's just better off not being there at all. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. Let's talk about Colossus now. I want to build Protoss more about much less of a need for high-tech units, because in the various parts of Heart of the Swarm, there have been some really cool games I've seen out of Protoss where they just stick on a lot of gateway units, and it's a lot about constant trading, constant aggression, counterattacking, stuff like that, and those are stupidly hard to run. There are very few players that can run things like that. People like Huck, people like Stork are people that come into mind for things like that. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the gateway units and stuff are balanced around the fact that you're going to have a powerful army if you can get up things like Colossus, especially since they've been around since the start. But they're just so boring, because if you have 0 Colossus and you're waiting for one to come out, your army sucks. Then when you get that first Colossus out, your army is really strong. So and then the counter circles are very boring as well. Either you have to counter them with Corruptors, or you have to counter them with Vikings. And if the Colossus just die for nothing, then the game's over. Protoss loses. The direction they're going with it is actually just making Colossus even more stronger, because they're adding the Warp Prism pickup range, and just you wait until that comes along. Range 6 pickups on a Warp Prism with range 9 Colossus is going to be insane. They'll be impossible to kill. So I would actually really look at reinventing the way that this unit does damage. And I would make it more about knowing where it's going to deal damage before it actually happens, kind of like the Ravager that was just introduced. And the reason being is because if you're going to have a unit that does a lot of damage like this, and you're relying on it to deal with big chunks of armies at a time, at the very least it should be something that the opponent can see, and also something that you can plan out better, so you can kind of in advance kind of select where they're going to fire before that happens. So it's more about zoning, it's more about micro, and it's more about decision making, because right now it's literally just make stuff, support them, and then just A-move them, and whatever happens is what happens, and it's really boring. I can honestly say from day one, I have played Protoss on the ladder. That's the race I have played 90% of my games with, and I have tried to avoid Colossus like a plague, because I think they are the most boring unit ever Fighting against them is boring, using them is boring, and I've had the most fun in this game when I've purposefully avoided trying to use Colossus because they just are not interesting at all. So, yeah, that's my rant about Colossus. Here, speaking of rants, I hope you're ready for this because I hate Widow Mines. I don't hate them for the sake that they're too hard to fight. I hate them for the sake that they're just way too much of a coin flip. And this is a weird dynamic because a lot of people like to not, or kind of like to be caught off guard as far as how much damage a unit's going to deal. But the Widow Mines, if you've noticed, if you go back and look at all the balance patches in Heart of the Swarm, every single one of them about Taran has been about the Widow Mine, and that is not okay. That's a huge signal that the unit just doesn't work. On top of, I mean, like I said, these aren't just personal complaints. There are a lot of instances where Widow Mines just take way too much effort to deal with, and I'm speaking of a lot of this from the Zerg point of view, in the sense that if Widow Mines get burrowed and if there's a bio army there, you just have to wait and find a point where you can just take all of your stuff and just run over it and just hope that you win and hope that the Widow Mine shots kind of suck. Because if you miss a couple and they hit your Baneling Clump, then you're dead. And that's... I've seen way too many professional level TVZ games decided by one or two Widow Mines getting a lucky shot on a Baneling Clump and killing everything and the game's over. And that's just bad. On top of that whole mechanic being bad, the fact that they've totally killed off strategies in Heart of the Swarm is a huge problem. And by that I mean they have made PvT even more stale and linear than it's ever been throughout the entire life of the game. It's the fact that you can't safely open with Charge Zealots, the fact that you can't safely do storm builds and stuff like that because they've totally eliminated it, makes it so that Protosses are so predictable. Everyone knows they're either going to open with some type of defensive or offensive blink, and then they're going to go Colossus right afterward. And it makes it so that I could literally load up any given PvT and I could predict the game in about 3-minute intervals and be right about 90% of the time about what's going to happen. It's just such a boring unit. So the question is, what should we do about it? I think we should focus a little bit more on what these things can do to help a Taran get to later stages of the game, considering these are such inexpensive units. So I think they need to focus them a little bit more on defending harassment, kind of like how the Shredders were initially designed at the beginning of the Heart of the Swarm beta. I think using them for little positional plays and defending harassment and stuff so that Taran can get into bigger and better tech such as battlecruisers and things that are more interesting would be cool. But at their base, the fact that they are an answer in large quantities to battlecruisers as well as things like Zerglings or Banelings, it's like, wait, you have a unit that deals perfectly with the biggest and the smallest units in the game? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I just hate this unit, and notice how all my complaints are largely targeted around what they introduced in Heart of the Swarm. But yeah, I have a big problem with these, and they definitely need to change, and I think that they will, like I've talked about before, with the introduction of the Herc, with their efforts of adding Hellbats and things like that, to answer different gameplay scenarios that Terrans just couldn't really deal with before. So, I don't know. There's just way too many things that are reliant on them in PvT, and especially TVZ. So I'd like to see these change a lot, and I'd like them to really open the book as far as how to do that. Okay, let's talk about Ravens, and this is going to be a lot shorter rant than before. Right now, everyone knows that PDD lasts way too long, and they've already talked about changing that in Legacy of the Void, and I agree with that. But the problem is that now if you reduce that PDD time, there's not nearly enough utility for this unit right now. And I think the way you make this unit cool is you make their turrets better. I would say something like giving them a lot more health to try and funnel or kind of reduce surface area a similar way that a force field does, but these things will still attract attention and fire from other units. So if these served more as like, they can put down temporary units to tank for things, so like reduce their damage by a little bit, but really increase their health and really increase the time that they stay on the field. That'd be cool, because there's not really a good way for Taran to zone things out positionally, except for Widow Mines, which, like we've talked about, are just way too feast or famine right now. And I think if you're really looking for a way to make mech cool in Legacy of the Void, the combination of things like putting down turrets and closing off attack pathways with your tank army supporting would be a really cool way to kind of dress up mech and make it really faithful to what it's supposed to be, which is about, small little counterattacks here and there, but also being able to just establish position and make your opponent suffer for losing that position. I also mentioned a little bit more about seeker missiles in the text here, and I'm just encouraging them to take a second look at it, because right now it's not really that useful, and most of the time people can just dodge it and walk away. One of the coolest moments I've ever seen is Polt versus Hyun at MLG. I was actually in the crowd, and the coolest moment of the whole tournament was when seeker missiles blew up a whole bunch of stuff, and it totally turned the tide of the battle. So if they were more guaranteed and more fun to watch, that'd be cool. And it mostly feels like if people get hit by seeker missiles right now, it's just because they messed up. So yeah, they do have a good place in TVT, I will give them that, but they do need more utility overall. Okay, this is probably the most risque thing I'm going to suggest here, but nuclear missiles need to be a thing. And the reason they need to be a thing is because if you go back and look at the biggest, I guess, most interesting parts of StarCraft over history, it's usually when a lot of stuff dies unexpectedly. And it's kind of different case for the Widow Mines because it happens all the time, and it kind of gives wins to people that don't really deserve it. But as far as nukes, I feel like nukes are more like a way to just demand position once again, like we've talked about. And that's one thing that Taran is supposed to be kind of centered around in their design, is demanding position. So I'm not really sure what the answer is with this, and I don't plan on this actually being looked at whatsoever throughout Legacy of the Void. But if it were me, I would really explore nukes, because there have been some really cool games in the past where people have kind of zoned off an attack path with a nuke, and they've made some really cool tactical plays with drops and stuff, to the point where if somebody tries to report to the drop and send their army through there, they'll just get hit by a nuke anyway, so they'll have to find more creative ways to deal with that, which would bring forward more interesting calls, such as maybe Nidus Worms to get around an army that's positioning with the nuke, maybe things like recalling over to a base to get a better position, stuff like that, but I don't know. This is more so me just kind of being like, nukes aren't really used, and let's find a way to use them. So I guess take that for what it is. Okay, battle cruisers. Battle cruisers, I have no idea what their changes are for Legacy of the Void, because their suggested changes make no sense. And people have pointed this out, where they talked about in the video that they can teleport to anywhere that the Terran doesn't have vision, but then I saw them teleporting on places that they obviously do have vision, like over an army, so it's like, what are you guys even doing with this change? As it is, just on the surface, there's way too many counters to battlecruisers right now. And they need to be way more useful in small numbers, because the way battlecruisers ever get good is if you have like 20 of them, and there's no possible way you can kill them all because they all have way too much health. So I would explore ways to make them more useful in smaller numbers, and I would explore ways to make their repair rates more interesting, because I think one of the coolest mechanics in the whole game that's really underutilized right now is the fact, or rather, when mules drop from the sky. Or say like in the first campaign where you could have your barracks units drop from the sky. That's such a cool looking thing, and just the idea of stuff falling out of the sky and being important on the battlefield is so cool. So if repair rates and things like a lot of battlecruisers and a lot of mules were actually a strategy, I think that'd be really cool, and mostly for kind of the visual effect where you have this huge ship and it's getting reinforcements by having things called out from the sky to help them out. I think that's a cool thing, and a lot of game design is really just finding something that people just like, and it's a cool thing, and just making it work in your game. So I would really look into that. Thors, I like my explanation here. It's basically saying, what the hell does this unit even do? Right now, the uses for Thors are basically zoning out Mutalisks a little bit. That's it. That's all they do. And the way you make them useful is you give them more of a place in mech. And the way they get importance in mech, let's take a step back here. The reason mech doesn't work right now, largely, is because Protos always has an answer for it. And yes, I'm speaking strictly in Taran versus Protos. The reason mech doesn't work in that matchup is because Protos either has Immortals in charge and they can just run them over with brute force, or they just have way too many Stargate units, and the Terran just can't get on top of it with things like Vikings. So Thors really need to have more of a focus on single unit air targeting, I think. Right now their only purpose is to kind of splash a little bit on Mutalisks, but Mutalisks typically aren't the reason that Zerg wins battles. It's more so about the Banelings blowing up the Marines, and then the Mutalisks will just kind of clean up whatever else is there. So I don't think that really matters too much. But if you get into a really deep late game scenario with Mech versus Protoss, the Protoss just has way too many answers. Like, carriers kill everything, Tempest kill everything, assuming you can't ever get enough Vikings. And that's a common problem. If you don't see the Protoss switching quickly enough, you start making Vikings, and all of a sudden you're behind in upgrades to a carrier fleet, and then you're dead. Especially if you eat storms, or if they just happen to mass switch on you. Like if they start showing a lot of Stargate play, and then they just switch back into ground, you have 40 Vikings that aren't doing anything, then you're probably dead. So, I don't know. They need to round out a mech army, and that's something that mech just doesn't have right now. I'm also saying they need to be useful as a splash-in, but that's kind of their only place right now. They need to pick one way or the other. It needs to be really useful as a splash-in, or it needs to be a specific answer to making a unit composition work. One last thing is, I mentioned that the stun mechanic was good, and one of my most favorite moments from all of StarCraft is a build that Thorzane showed way back in the day, where he used the Thor stun to kill like maybe 8 or 10 Colossus, and I thought that was really cool. And the fact that there's not really a lot of units that kind of just kill other big units is a thing that they should really be looking at. Like, say for example, if they had the stun mechanic and it could outrange Colossus or something, and you're running bio with Thors to deal with the Colossus instead of Vikings or something like that, I think that'd be cool. But I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority. Moving on, let's talk about siege tanks. They're not the most awkward unit, but they're really awkward. The changes that they talked about in Legacy of the Void is being able to pick them up with medevacs while they're still in siege mode, and I don't get it. Like, siege is supposed to be really strong, but mobility is also supposed to be really strong, so they kind of just have a half-assed version of both. So I would just flat out say that siege needs to be better. Siege tanks just need to deal more damage per shot. It needs to be a point where if you get hit by a siege tank somewhere, you have to say, damn, I have to respect that siege tank even if there's just one. And the way you make this not too broken, especially for TVT, is you just make them a little bit harder to access, you make them a little bit more expensive, maybe a little bit bigger, but it needs to be a point where if any unit comes out on the map, it needs to be important. And right now, if there's 2 or 3 tanks out against, like, say, Protoss, or even against Zerg, it's kind of just like, well, big deal. I mean, I'll just charge at it anyway and kill it, so what's the point? So, another thing is that this unit was eliminated by Widow Mines because Widow Mines were just flat out better and more flexible. So, this is one unit where I would say just got lost in translation here. Because back in Brood War, they did have a lot more damage to be put out, and I really don't like it when people just say, just make it Brood War again, because that's not really a solution. But in the case for siege tanks, I would actually say, yeah, if you just made it back where it was a Brood War, it would be way better, because these units need to be important when they hit the field, and right now they're usually just not. So, yeah, moving on from that. Notice the insert photo here, and that's because the Corruptors are so boring that I couldn't even find an image on the internet that has them on a transparent background. And that sounds so silly, but that just shows you how little people care about this. Corruptors are so boring. I have never seen a single game where somebody started making Corruptors and I was like, wow, this is a cool game. They are the most automatic, only option type of thing that Zerg has, and they never make a game interesting. This has been a huge problem since Wings of Liberty, and this unit has barely seen any changes. The only thing they've considered doing is giving them a purpose beyond when they kill whatever they're supposed to kill by letting them attack buildings or something, and if that didn't work in Heart of the Swarm beta, then why are they trying to go back to it now? More importantly, making these units needs to be an important decision in the game. Right now, it's kind of like, I'm going to make Roach Hydra, and if I fight Colossus, I'll just add in some Corruptors, and hopefully it'll work out, yay. It's like, that's not an interesting way to play the game. that's just going through the motions. There's no thought process there. There's no interesting aspects of strategy. So I think the way that you make these things actually useful is you give them some sort of permanent effect. And I'm thinking something like they have something on a cooldown, maybe like every 30 seconds or so. They can go up and they can tag a unit, and that unit now has like 5 less hit points total. And it would make it so that healing effects don't matter, repairing wouldn't matter. They could eventually kind of tick down a building or important units or something, and it would give them more of a long-standing importance on the battlefield. And it would be more about like Corruptors would kind of be this thing where if you can find a way to defend all their attacks, or maybe keep them busy with counterattacks all the time, your Corruptors will just get more and more important as the game goes on, because they will have permanent effects no matter what they do. So yeah, this unit needs a lot of help, and I'm just shocked that there's been such little effort in making this unit important. And mostly making it a unit that Zergs actually want to build, instead of just feeling like they have to. So I think this is my last one, and this is probably the most sought after one as far as the Cyclone discussion, because right now the Cyclones are a joke. They're way, 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 way too strong. And the other side of that isn't just the fact that they're too strong, because you can obviously patch that and change it, but it totally duplicates the purpose of making a Reaper or a Hellion. So no matter what, it's going to replace the functionality of one of those two units, so why is it even in the game? I just don't know what game situation it fulfills, and this is the one unit where I would really encourage developers to think outside of the box in StarCraft. Think of stuff you've never done before in the game, at least in multiplayer, and make it cool. And I'm thinking something that they haven't really done before is they haven't made terrain very important outside of this is a cliff, or this is something where something can fly. Like say if there's like a pack of trees or something that's blocking the way, or if there's off the map space that's like the ground that's really low to the ground. Let these units walk in those weird places and kind of hide in those weird places in a way that somebody would need to kind of discover that they're there. Or they could come in from angles that are really not expected and probably wouldn't get seen most of the time. Say if they like walk around the map and go somewhere strange, it wouldn't be like an air unit, because you couldn't just maybe sit like some Mutalisk somewhere and stop it. Obviously that'd be way too early. Let's say more like an Overlord or something, you couldn't just spot it with that. But they need to look into things for this unit that have never really been done in StarCraft before if they want to make it useful. Because just making another duplicate of a Hellion or a Reaper it's like, what's the point? Why would I ever build a Reaper or a Hellion if I have this unit and it's just way better in every other way? So, I don't know. I don't get this unit. It's either going to stay and be tweaked a lot, and they're going to change Reapers or Hellions to be something else, or they just need to find some weird place in the game that they've never even tried before and try to apply it that way, because it's just silly right now. So with all that said, that's pretty much all I have to say. I know this is a long video, but of course you can usually expect that from me, considering I do like to make words come out of my face hole. So if you guys have any comments or anything, I would be happy to hear them, so just leave them down there in the comments. I will be making more videos about Legacy of the Void here in the near future, since I am between semesters right now in school. So I'll be talking more about what I want to see out of the game, maybe what their changes will mean, and hopefully they'll release more details on where they're going to go with it in the near future so we can talk about it. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave me some comments, say hi. Obviously subscribe if you want to get some more information from me. But yeah, I'll see you guys soon, and thanks for listening.